Hello, I'm Will Campos. I'm the writer and co-creator of Video Game High School. I'm also a senior staff writer at RocketJump.
Hey, I'm Mike Simons. I'm creative director at RocketJump, and I write a bunch of stuff here.
We are here today to talk a little bit more about screenplay formatting. There's been a lot of questions in the forums and a lot about some more advanced screenplay techniques and tips and tricks that we did not cover in the previous video.
Oh God, this is all Mike's fault!
So we're kind of circling back to that topic, so let's dive right in. One of the first things we should probably talk about is dual dialogue. What do you do in a script when two characters are supposed to say something at the exact same time? So what you want to do is you'll be able to find this in pretty much any screenplay formatting software is there's an option called dual dialogue. And what you want to do is highlight both pieces of dialogue and then select dual dialogue. And what it'll do is simply put both chunks of dialogue next to each other on the same line of the page, thus giving the impression to the reader that both people are talking at the same time. It's a nice way of visually representing that. What do you do when you have a character like Batman, who in some scenes is Bruce Wayne, but in other scenes is Batman? And I was like, that's actually a really good question. I've never written a superhero movie before, and I was like, what would you do in that specific situation? So we actually went and looked at the script for The Dark Knight Rises. Check this out. In scenes where he's in the Batcave or he's talking to Alfred, his name is just Wayne in the script. And then when it's a scene where Batman is running around and Batman is speaking, it's Batman. And I think generally speaking, everyone is familiar enough with the Bruce Wayne Batman thing to get what's going on and understand that we're not talking about two separate characters.
It's basically answering the question, is he wearing this suit?
But this did bring us to something else we wanted to talk about, so why don't you dive into that?
Yeah. It's when they'll introduce a character and say, like, the main character won't know this person yet. He's like, a beautiful woman walks by, and then a few scenes later, they introduce, like, hi, I'm Margaret, and that character's name changes to Margaret. One of the things that I always recommend is if it's really a short amount of time, it really makes more sense to say, a beautiful woman like Margaret, and have her name be Margaret, even though the character doesn't know it yet. Because again, it's like, you have to think one of the important jobs of why you even have character names listed is so that the production can keep track of it. And so it's like, if we're going to learn her name a few minutes later, it makes sense just to call her that.
With continuous, you're using that to denote a real-time transition from one scene to another. Like there's no time has passed. We are following the actors from one location to another in real time. Like, for instance, in VGHS, I think in Nobody Cool Goes to Prom, we have this moment where Key busts Wendell, and then she's like, take him away, boys. And then the goons grab Wendell and drag him out the door, and then Key follows him out the door. It's like interior Shane's room, and then interior dorm hallway continuous. And then it says, like, the goons drag Wendell off down the hall. That's what you want. That's when you use a continuous.
Yeah.
Whereas moments later, again, the implication... moments later is a little weird. I don't know that you really need to use moments later all that often, but sometimes when you throw from one slug line to another, people are unsure of how much time has passed. Yeah. So if it's like somebody goes, well, but that guy was over there and now he's... And then you do interior the other room later and they open the door and he's dead. He's dead! You'd say moments later, the implication being they rushed from one location to the other.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this is a really fun one. Someone asked, what if I'm doing a scene set in space? Is that exterior space day or is it exterior space night? Like, there are no day or night in space. So this is a really simple answer. You just do exterior space. You don't need to say whether it's daytime or nighttime in space.
Yeah.
As a general rule, you want to be using day and night almost exclusively, unless for a very specific story reason, a scene has to take place at sunrise or sunset. We're with a vampire and the sun is rising. No, in those cases, I would use a sunrise or dawn or sunset or dusk slug line. Yeah. But that would be the only time I would use it, is if it has a specific cinematic story reason to use that. Otherwise, you just want day and night.
Yeah. So, the other question people had was about kind of specific camera notations, like POV shots or close-ups and when to indicate it. This sort of falls under the same category for me, where you're kind of getting into doing a cinematographer's job, and unless like there's a very, very critical story reason that you want to mention that you're doing POV or something like that, it's something that I recommend just staying away from completely.
So let me ask you a question, because I'm a sloppy when it comes to this stuff. So when I do a POV, I'll do bold POV : and then I'll like describe the action. Or similarly, like close up, Han Solo's hand slides under the table and he reaches his gun, the end close up. How would you denote that?
The way I always do that is I try to make the language as close to that. So I would literally say exactly what you said, like his hand reaches down for the gun underneath the table without ever noting close up.
Interesting.
You use the language to make the choice of shot unavoidable, if that kind of makes sense. It's just a way of being careful and elegant without directly telling somebody what to do.
That's very cool, because I think actually what people don't realize is how powerful the prose is as a tool for suggesting that stuff. I think people tend to think of the prose just as a description of the action, but it also, the way you describe something, suggests something about the cinematic nature.
When to use caps, when to use italics, when to use underlines. The general rule is that anytime you're using caps, it should be exclusively for a character's name, specifically the first time you introduce them. However, it's the kind of thing where when you're writing, you want to emphasize, and so a lot of times I'll easily just fall into the trap of describing an intense event, and I'll use caps as well.
Yeah. I definitely break that rule all the time when I'm writing. I think we should find like we could definitely find a section of VGHS script that is just flagrant violation of that, because it's when we do our action, we'll be like, he dives this way and then shoots that guy, and it's just this. It's a mess, though, and you shouldn't do it. Do as I say, not as I do. It's okay.
Write really good stuff, and it will speak for itself.
Yeah, if you're finding yourself needing to capitalize every other word to keep the viewer's attention, it probably means you have a bigger problem going on than whether in the scene itself. So, as a general rule, stick to caps just for your character names, and as far as italics and underlines are concerned, you don't really need them in a script, unless of course, again, italics I would use just as you would use in writing. If you're saying something that, like again the title of a book, you would italicize that the same way that you italicize that in literature. So let's talk about music cues. This is another one that comes up a lot. Again, this is one of those ones where it's like dusk and dawn, like capitalizing. It's like be very, 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 very careful. Unless you absolutely positively need a music cue to explain a scene, then you don't need it. But if you are going to do one, if you absolutely this sequence of a hitman assembling a sniper rifle has to have Ave Maria playing underneath it, what you would do is you would, at the top of the scene, just say Ave Maria plays as X, Y, and Z happens. Exactly. And you can just call it out at the top of the scene. Last subject. Whenever we would do VGHS montages, essentially what we would do is just denote that we were starting a montage by just putting in all caps, begin montage. So the reader's reading it and they go, oh, we're starting a montage now. Once you do that, you then describe the montage. And that, sometimes we'll do just sort of flavor text being like, we begin a montage of shots of the video game high school campus. And then I just go down the line and denote those maybe with an asterisk or a dash, and then just like a dash and then the shot and then a dash and then the next shot. Now, that can get a little bit more complicated when you're intercutting between separate scenes in a montage. Like if we've got a montage, like there's one in season 3, episode 3, where we're cross-cutting between Ted in jail, Brian and the FBS team, and Key doing her campaign.
Yeah, all different locations.
And I think basically what we do with that is, like, the montage, if I remember correctly, starts with the prison bars slamming shut on Ted, and the prose is something like, the prison bars slam shut on Ted, and we begin montage. And then from there, I would do a new slug line every time we're changing location. So, like, we go from that to Key in her election headquarters, and then we go from Key in her election headquarters to Brian D and the FPS team, beating another team. So then you follow that pattern through the montage. Now let's say at a certain point you get to a point where you just want to be intercutting at the editor's discretion between those things to just kind of build a momentum. At that point, you could abandon the slug lines and just describe, like, we intercut between these 3 scenes. Then you also always put end montage at the end of a montage as well, so that the audience knows that it's over, and then you go on to the next scene.
Again, it's all about what you want to accomplish and trying to make it as clear as possible.
So that's it for Screenplay Formatting 102. If you guys have any more questions, please throw them out in the forums, sound off in the discussion area, and we'll try our best to answer them either in the forums themselves or maybe in Screenplay Formatting 201 or 103 or whatever comes next.
How does college work?
But thanks so much for watching, guys.